Good evening, everyone. So today we have Osaka University's on Morita Atsuro Morita, and Gergely Mohacsi, the anthropologists from Osaka University, and they're going to talk to us about the sugar trades in East Asia and about the basically how it's metabolized in the body. It's going to be a fun talk, I hope, and we will learn a lot. So let's start with whom?
So yeah, I'll start.
All right. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Good evening and morning. Thank you for joining this fixed talk. Today I'm going to talk a bit about sugar in Asia as a sort of to indicate colonialism as a planetary process. I'd like to go back to one of the previous talks by Dominic Boyer, and also probably Michael Fish. Those of whom who mentioned sugar as a key commodity in the expansion of European colonialism in the Americas. And this is also, of course, well-known story. Starting from Sydney Mintz, many historians and anthropologists have been discussing the way sugar production derived capitalism development and colonialism, particularly in West India, particularly in Caribbean Sea, as well as Caribbean islands, as well as other parts of the Americas. And this also has to do with the Anthropocene, which is hotly debated among social and natural scientists nowadays. So sugar, and particularly plantation of sugar cane, is seen as one of the driving force of the planetary environmental change that is now called the Anthropocene. For example, Lewis and Marlin's, I'm not sure, okay, Lewis and Marlin's famous paper called Defining the Anthropocene, published in Nature in 2015, discusses that so-called Columbian exchange started after the colonization of the Americas as a beginning, as an indicator of the beginning of the Anthropocene. They argued that Columbian exchange has tremendous consequences in terms of ecological changes because the two separated fauna and was mixed due to the importation of North American crops, American plants to Europe and Asia, as well as the introduction of Eurasian plants, including sugarcane, to the Americas. So from ecological historical viewpoint, sugarcane and plantation is clearly one of the driving force of the planetary scale environmental change. And also, Dominic Boyer discussed in the previous talk that sugarcane plantation as a sort of archetype of the modern conceptualization of energy and labor, and it had sort of tremendous effect on the rise of new energy imagination at the time of the Industrial Revolution in 18th century, in late 18th century. So sugar is in that kind of story of the Anthropocene and colonialism, sugar is indeed the main character of the change. But I just want to look at a different kind of entanglement between sugar and colonialism in Asia. So obviously, sugar in Asia is not a direct consequence of European colonialism or colonialism or the colonization of the Americas. But at the same time, it is also well known for historians that sugar production and consumption rise significantly around the same time of the colonization of the Americas from 17th century on. And also this rise of sugar production and the expansion of intra-Asian trade behind that had a tremendous effect on the formation of what we take as traditional cultures in Asia. For example, in Japan, people see that traditions and culture in Edo period, which is from 17th century to 19th century, as a sort of reference point of what they see as indigenous or local or traditional. But that culture was also fundamentally influenced by the rise of intra-Asian trade and the growing consumption and production of sugar in the region. In that sense, what we see as traditional is also deeply entangled with colonialism. I'm going to look into this entanglement in this talk and discusses that colonialism as a planetary process involving direct and indirect consequences beyond formally known as colonialism. Okay, sorry. So sugar was already part of everyday life before Western colonization formally arrived at Asia in 1840. I take this year from the Opium War, and which was a huge shock for Japanese intellectuals and politicians at that moment, as well as those in China. And as I said, sugar is part of what is now seen as traditional cultures in the region. The picture here, which manju, is a traditional Japanese cake pan, and many people, many of us in Japan sees this sort of cake as a part of traditional culture. And according to Christian Daniels, who is historian of technology in East Asia, sugar production was one of the key traditional Chinese technology. So this traditional sugar in this period before 19th century was mainly produced by Chinese plantation in Southeast Asia, plantation run by Chinese traders in Southeast Asia, and by Chinese technology. So there was different kind of sugar before 19th century in Asia. And and sugar was key commodity in pre-modern intra-Asian trade, particularly from 17th century. But its roots goes even further back into the past. So one of the most precious, sugar was one of the most precious imports from China since probably 7th century in Japan. And 17th century expansion of sugar trade from Thailand to Japan. Sugar trade from Thailand to Japan expanded significantly in 17th century. At the same time, sugar production technology spread from China to neighboring countries, including Thailand, Japan, Philippines, and so on. So in that sense, sugar is also a key element in technology transfer from China to neighboring countries, as well as the rise of pre-capitalist market economy and growth of urban economies in this region. And this period is also seen as formative period of traditional states and cultures. For example, unification of Japan happened in 1590, and also regime shift from Ming to Qing dynasty happened 1644. And 100 years later, the establishment of Chakri dynasty in Thailand was established. So in that sense, this period was also a time when societies in Asia was organized around bureaucratic and relatively strong states, particularly compared with previous time in Japan and Southeast Asia. And this kind of story about the centrality of trade and commodity exchange in Asia has been well discussed by historians such as Amino Yoshihiko, Oliver Walters, Hamashita Takashi, and others. So they see pre-modern Asia as essentially as trade network among port cities and hinterlands. This system is centered. Centered on the tributary system, political ceremonial exchange between Chinese emperor, which was seen who claimed itself as cosmological sovereign, and tributaries like Thailand, Korea, Japan, and so on. And this kind of trade has been here in Asia for since about 8th or 9th century. So it has quite long history. But as I said, that this trade has expanded. This trade expanded significantly in 17th century. And this trade also this trade has also an interesting characteristics. On the one hand, trade centered on state-state exchange, formerly called tributary system. But on the other hand, there's a lot of parallel trading, some of which are illegal or informal, was happening too. And this complex web of trade characterized Asian history for quite a long time. And here, and this these historians have been arguing that arguing for seeing a history of Asia not as a history of states and nations, but as a complex interaction between port cities and hinterlands mediated by various kinds of traders, including European ones. And the rise of sugar trade expansion is also significantly influenced by the entrance of European players to this regional trading system. So expansion of Asia trade in 17th century is clearly stimulated and mediated by Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, and Spanish fleets, in addition to Chinese fleets that was always active in this region. And this and the rise of these fleets, European fleets, had a significant impact in terms of the quality and quantity of trade in the region. And one of the results was expansion of Chinese plantations in Thailand. So here we see different kinds of plantation in Asia. So in 17th century, large-scale sugarcane cultivation started by Chinese traders in coastal areas of the Gulf of Thailand. And it was joint investment by Chinese traders and Thai nobles. And cultivation cultivated by sugarcane was cultivated by Chinese laborers imported from Hokkien, Guangdong, and Hainan, and so on. These Chinese laborers are mainly controlled by Chinese traders who developed complex system of recruiting, managing, and exploiting these people. At the same time, Thailand also became one of the key shipbuilding area in the region, or probably in the world. So these Chinese traders constructed a huge number of junks, Chinese-style sailing vessels in the Gulf of Thailand, and by using locally produced timbers. which was abundant at the time. So this also caused almost total deforestation of eastern region of Thailand. And given these two developments, Thailand became a production center in the tributary system from 17th to 18th century. So I think this this story about Thailand is particularly interesting in terms because it shows how European stimulation kind of resulted in new form of plantation and international trade. And it is also quite interesting in terms of some kind of continuity between of Thailand as production center in that period and now. So just like now, Thailand became production center for Japanese and many developing countries' factories. Thailand was a production center for Chinese traders in the 70th and 80th century. So this sort of regional economic system has been quite strong since 70th century, and many historians argue that it was precondition for the development of modern capitalist economy in Asia. And people like Hamashita argues that even under colonial time, this kind of historical legacy was still there and influential, and organized many economic activities in Southeast Asia and East Asia. And this international characteristics of traditional time in Japan and Asia is quite important in my view. So Japan was under seclusion, sakoku, from 1639 to 1854. But still, the country imported large amount of goods from Thailand and Southeast Asia, so it was hardly secluded. And the growth of urban economy that characterizes this period was largely stimulated by expanding trade in the tributary system. And the export of sugar and other goods from Thailand reached the peak at around the end of the 17th century. And this global network and global trade network operated by Dutch and Portuguese traders was inseparable of this growth. So this story, it seems to me that this story indicates that the impact of colonization of Americas reached well beyond Europe and the directly colonized areas. And planetary expansion of trade and commercial agriculture seemed to trigger wide-ranging socio-economic changes, from the rise of bureaucratic state in Japan, a new form of economy in Thailand and Southeast Asia, and massive migration of overseas Chinese. And this also indicates the deep entanglement between traditional form of everyday life and Western colonialism. Even this economic expansion happened more or less independently from direct Western colonization, but still this expansion was only made possible due to silver Dutch and Spanish traders brought into the region and their mediative role as transport, as the operator of commercial fleets. So in that sense, non-colonial worlds are totally alien to even traditional imaginations in Asia. I mean, and I think this is important. When particularly Japanese people think about non-colonial world or traditional world, the major referring point is Edo period, which is exactly the time of expansion of this trade. And many of traditional forms of life, from architecture to food to basic rituals and so on were formed around this time. So in that sense, even traditional way of life is deeply entangled with colonialism, although it might be indirect connection. And yes, I think it is important for the FICT project to when we imagine non-colonial world in Asia, it is, I mean, it is clearly, we are required to think beyond existent imagination about tradition and or the East, because the East, what we takes as the East itself is sort of byproduct of Western colonialism. And sugar is an interesting indicator of this entanglement. And I will just stop here and pass it and pass the mic to Gergely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ashley, should I just go on, or did you want to have discussion before I start?
I think you should go on, and then we will have the discussion all together.
Okay. All right.
I suppose it would be better, right?
Okay. And I will share my screen. Wait, no. Just a moment. This one, right? I keep sharing the different screen. I'm sorry. No. Okay, now it's good, right? Can you see? Okay, so thank you very much, Morita-san, for your talk, and I'm trying to pick up the line from sugar. My title is Breaking Down Sugar, and I try to bring it to something where we can imagine some alternative words and alternative histories. But I think I will need your help. So most of my alternative words will be kind of in a form of questions for discussion. Okay. So I was kind of happy to work on or think a little bit on sugar, because as many of you know, not all of you, but probably many of you know, I spent a big part of my research career on working and working with diabetes patients and researching diabetes in Japan and in other places. So it's kind of close to my heart. But I never tried to use this to imagine alternative words. So it's something kind of new for me, but hopefully it will turn out to something interesting. So this is more or less the structure of my talk today. I will start from the methods of this FICT, which is artifacts and timelines, or at least as I take it. Then I give you some nonfiction background, and then I'm going to jump to the discussion of my, not the discussion, the results of my speculations, 3 disease timelines, 2 artifacts, and probably at the end, if I have time, 1 sketchy planetary timeline that will lead to my questions for discussion. Okay. So when I was preparing for this talk, of course, I revisited the homepage and found some important springboard for my talk, which goes something like this. Probably all of you have read this. We hope nothing particularly awful has happened to you today, although that is increasingly unlikely given the timeline crisis in which you find yourself. It is argued that in these timelines, the diseases known as the Black Death or plague have triggered a series of events that disallowed or quickly ended attempts by countries of what was called Europe to invade and colonize much of the earth. This is what the FICT homepage tells us. And then if you were with us or if you saw it on the recorded video, so far Michael Fish and Dominic Boyer introduced us some very, very basic colonial timelines and artifacts, namely liberalism and sacropolitics. And they talked about how what we think of as capitalism is ideologically very much rooted in liberalism, and how what we think of as energy today, or what we act upon as energy, is kind of a result of what Dominic called sacropolitics. So it gives us kind of timelines, that out of nature timelines, linear growth timelines. And then last week, Kasper Jensen, and this week, Morita-san was talking about what I would call, these are my labels, so it's not their labels, obviously. But they talked about something what we could call quasi-colonial timelines, that probably we don't associate as much usually with colonial timelines, but they can be, but as Morita-san has also just talked about, they are also entangled with these main colonial timelines, namely Hong Kong cyberpunk and Southeast Asian sugar. And then if I go back to the FICT call for, not call for paper, but call for thinking, call for artifacts, I can't help noticing that the timeline that it starts and ends with is both are about disease. So I thought that I will try to relate this former talk somehow to what I'm probably most familiar with, is disease in my research, and I will try to think of either colonial or alternative disease timelines, because that's what the FICT, what is that, call for artifacts, kind of initial text kind of makes us to think. So to put it in a timeline, this is what FICT kind of ask us to do, right? We start with Black Death and we end with COVID. And is there any other way that we can imagine this timeline, or can put something else there? Obviously, it's a super simplified timeline here. You could have many more things in between, but what I would like you to help me also to think and think together is what kind of other things can come here. If we go from disease to disease, and if we think of disease timelines, obviously there will be diseases in between, right? Just to give you some hint, which is from science fiction, you have a lot of science fiction written about diseases, and they tend to, maybe you could think of these science fictions as alternative timelines, and especially I think Kim Stanley Robinson's plot is very similar to the FICT plot. It starts with Black Death, but all the others, except maybe the Calcutta Chromosome by Amitav Ghosh, are usually depicting global infectious diseases, plague or Shen fever, and all these plots, including actually the Calcutta Chromosome, are about are played out in global scale, and they tend to depict and they tend to talk about infectious diseases. I would say that the Calcutta Chromosome is a bit more complicated in terms of the plot or the timelines. There, it's more complex than the other three, but maybe that's for another talk. But basically, the point is that these are the disease in this colonial and even science fiction timelines is played out on a global scale, and they tend to be infectious diseases. Now back to this basic timeline, this colonial timeline. Any guesses or any ideas what can come here between? Anyone? Anything? But obviously there are no correct answers or incorrect. I mean, probably there are incorrect answers, but there are definitely not one correct answer. And obviously there would be millions of other diseases here. So this is just one timeline. No, anyone? No? Well, maybe you can come back and you can have ideas later during the discussion. One of the characteristics of this kind of timeline, this colonial disease timeline, if you look at it, or at least as I try to visualize this, is that you have certain diseases and they end. Okay, so you have a plague and it ends. You have something else, then it ends. And then you have COVID, and probably most of us think that, yes, it's going to end sometime. And then we will have other things to do, because then disease will end. One very symbolic disease in that sense, on this timeline, is HIV, AIDS. And the reason why I choose it here, of course, it didn't end, but it became a chronic disease. So in terms of this kind of infectious, chronic, non-chronic, acute diseases, it became something else, which usually do not appear on these kind of timelines. So it turned into something else, a chronic disease. And thanks to what I will going to talk about later, global health. There is something else there. Anyone knows what is that? Can't hear you, Ashley, but
check the comments. Check the chat box.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't check it because it's because the PowerPoint is whatever.
Is it measles? Is it measles?
Measles? No, it's smallpox. Could be measles, actually.
Can I read the other comments? There is syphilis, Spanish flu, tuberculosis, cancer. There's also diabetes.
Yeah, thank you. Cancer and diabetes usually play not very nicely on these kind of timelines, right? Because they don't end on a historical sense. And smallpox ended because that's actually the only disease that has been eradicated by vaccination. That's the only one among any other diseases. And it has a very sad colonial history, of course, because it's wiped out, I don't know how many, 90 or 80% of the population, original native population of the New World. But usually these kind of diseases don't play a very important role on these timelines, only at the moment when they are eradicated, right? So the next one, and it doesn't necessarily comes after AIDS, so I can't help saying that it's a very, very simplified timeline. Oops, sorry. Could be malaria, and the reason I added here malaria is also because that's a target of global health. So the reason why AIDS plays a very important role here and is kind of the middle of my timeline, again, it's a very random timeline. It's not an official timeline, but these are what I'm saying. This is a colonial historical timeline of disease. It usually is about infectious disease. It's usually about diseases that historically the historians of this kind of disease timelines can hope to eradicate, can hope to have an end to. And malaria is, for example, one on the list that that many global health experts think that one day could be or should be eradicated and should be a target of this kind of campaigns. So obviously, COVID is another disease on this list, not only on our timeline, but also on the timeline of global health. That a movement that more or less started with AIDS or around that time. And obviously the vaccination campaigns in COVID are related very much into this infrastructure and system of what we call global health in public health or medical anthropology or in the world. Now, you don't have to actually go to nonfiction to find voices that point out that global health is a colonial enterprise or a post-colonial enterprise, and then it should be decolonized. And especially in this year, when this COVID epidemic meets high levels of racism in the US or colonial legacies of vaccine diplomacy, this kind of narratives or this kind of critiques, I would say, become very, very strong and very loud. So you can see all around the world, and especially in countries that have colonial legacies, you have a lot of events that call themselves decolonizing global health. And you have articles and papers discussing it in medical journals like this one from Boehm and the others that I quote here. Global health needs integrated, decolonized approaches advanced by individuals and institutions that address the complex interdependence between histories of imperialism with health, economic development, governance, and human rights. The global movement to decolonize global health, led by students and other professionals, is one step towards this vision, they say. Okay, so what I'm trying to say that there are these non-fiction ways of decolonizing or voices of decolonizing global health. Actually, my one criticism or one of my problems with this is that very, very similarly to the science fiction that I quoted before, they tend to work in the same kind of historical timelines that we live. So they say that there is a progressive timeline when you had a colonial and post-colonial systems like global health. But there will be a better time next in the future when there isn't one because we decolonize them. So it's a progression. It's something that there is a linear progression towards somewhere. Now I would like to, in the remaining time of my talk, to think a little bit about alternative disease timelines that are not trying to decolonize, for example, global health from the outside, but let's try to think about disease timelines that decolonize disease from the inside or from disease itself. Maybe that's something that anthropologists tend to do better than some other things. So let's try that. This is from this point, it's more or less speculation, but I will give you some anthropological works or more or less anthropological works to support my ideas. Okay, so I give you three ways of three alternative ways that we can think about. First, a bit sketchily, and then through my two artifacts, a little bit more detail. So one is epidemiological transition. It's a very common notion in public health. It tells the story of how we eradicated all infectious diseases, or we will, and then we will have non-communicable diseases instead of that. Now, there is, even in public health or even in epidemiology, a very strong argument that actually it's not such a linear line because when you have more non-communicable diseases, you have more chances to have re-emerging infectious diseases. And I could give you many different ways of arguing for this, from antimicrobial resistance to the epidemic forms of diabetes, which I will come back later. But if you just think about how COVID plays out in today's world, it's very, very strongly related to people. I mean, people are much more affected by COVID and become much more, more of them become victims if they have non-communicable diseases. So the more people with weakened body from chronic diseases will be a better a better pool for re-emerging infectious diseases. So you can argue that this is, what is this? Is like a cyclical timeline? I don't know. I mean, maybe you could argue for that. The next one I wanted to think a little bit about is diagnostic times, that also uses disease to think about decolonizing this kind of linear history from the inside. And you can see that times are overlapping, like recovery, drug therapy, disability, death. These are not things that come after each other. Sometimes they include each other. Sometimes one comes earlier than the other one. Sometimes drug therapy is recovery, but sometimes recovery comes after drug therapy. And if you think about, for example, the movement of what was it called? Cryonism? Ashley, can you help me? The movement where people freeze themselves in big freezers and they...
Cryo, it's not cryotherapy, but it's like cryo. Eduardo, cryo?
Yes.
Like freezing yourselves.
Cryonism.
So none of us are, Englishes are not our first language, so...
Yeah, sorry for that.
Cryogenics, Emil, to our help. Cryogenics, Emil.
Cryogenics, thank you.
Yes.
When people actually kill themselves to recover in a later time. So what I'm trying to show here is that these times are anything but linear when you take disease as an entry point. So maybe we could think of these timelines as overlapping each other. And then another one is not as radical, or maybe it's not as extreme, but it's something that we're getting, we are knowing more and more about it every year, is epigenetics, which some people call biological histories, is when you have an event and the person who experienced that event will genetically his genetic switches in his or her body will be inherited by his or her children. One very famous example is, for example, pregnant women who witnessed the fall of the Twin Towers in New York, and their children who genetically kind of inherited the stress that they experienced on that day. So these times, what do we call these times? Loop? I don't know, maybe. These are just speculations. Let me go to my artifact. I have two artifacts. One is diabetes and the other one is the metabolism. But I try to kind of show how you can imagine these three different alternative timelines through concrete disease. So diabetes, diagnostic timeline of diabetes is, you could call diabetes we call diabetes a chronic metabolic condition of insulin resistance, where the body's deteriorating capacity to break down carbohydrates and sugar into glucose, leading to various disabilities and fatal diseases. We usually call it a disease, but when we call it a disease, we have this image of a disease. It's something that has a beginning and an end, but diabetes is not really that kind of disease. So the diabetes is, it could be, I think it's much more correct to call it a condition. It's a metabolic condition in the body where people are getting through different stages. If they don't treat it well, they know that there will become a stage of drug therapy, another stage of disability, and eventually they are going to die. But in what order and how these things come and how they overlap with each other, it depends on the treatment, on the person, on all kind of circumstances. But that's something that most people living with diabetes kind of know, that this is how it works. And it's not a kind of disease that has a simple beginning and a simple end, like most of the infectious diseases. Also, diabetes is a very important example of epigenetics, as also Harris Solomon, an medical anthropologist, wrote about this beautifully in his book on metabolic living in India. But there are also a lot of scientific papers and research on how famine in war or industrialization in a Swedish village can actually trigger obesity or diabetes in generations down the line because of the events that the ancestors of those people experienced sometime in a war, and in colonial events as well, and in so many other ways. The third timeline that, our alternative timeline that I mentioned in a previous slide, was epidemiological transition. And that's something that that has been an important theme in the literature on diabetes. So, for example, I quote here Amy Moore and Thomas Verk, who actually criticizes epidemiological transition, not from the cyclical way that I try to do, but she says that in contrast to the epidemiological transitions, linear progressive history, her book aims to craft a troubled, interrupted, and slowed down version of this transition story, one that approaches the uneven distribution of diabetic sugar in relation to the ongoing effects of colonial legacies and modes of knowledge making. So she's not taking the criticism by adding a cyclical phase to the linear history, but she says that this kind of transition is much more complicated, it's much more uneven than linear histories of public health tend to argue, and that has a lot to do with the colonial legacies of that disease. So most of her fieldwork has been done in Central America, in Belize, covering a lot of the issues that Morita-san in the beginning of his talk was talking about. My second artifact is the metabolism. As I mentioned, diabetes is a metabolic disorder. And metabolism is also an interesting artifact, I think, to kind of to relate this disorder, this diabetes as a disorder, as a disease, to forms of capitalism and even to the Anthropocene, as I'm going to try to show in this almost final slide. So here I rely on two very, very interesting and great articles. So I would really suggest all of you to read these articles, the original, because I can't tell you all what they are saying and what they are accounting for, but they are really very well written, two very well written articles. One is a historical article by Kuriyama Shigehisa, a Japanese historian at Harvard, and about the forgotten fear of excrement. And he argues that the idea and the concept of metabolism was kind of a relief from what he calls the medieval fear of excrement. He starts his article with an Italian doctor, I forgot his name, who measured the weight of the food he eats, and then what comes out, and then he realized that it's only half of the weight of what comes out of the food, of what goes in, and that's kind of, it surprised him a lot, because obviously he didn't have the idea of energy or metabolism to account for that kind of weight difference. But thanks to nutrition science and chemistry in the 17th, 18th century, this idea of metabolism became an important aspect to account for digestion and nutrition. And as Kuriyama shows, this idea of metabolism actually it triggered what was called in America in the 19th century economic nutrition, and it became entangled with the notion of labor as waste. And as he says, let me just quote him: money and the body were bound by more than mere metaphor. They were entwined directly and inextricably by the mutual convertibility of life, capital, and energy. So metabolism transformed ingested food into energy, but this bodily energy could in turn be translated into work, which in turn could be translated into money, which in turn ensured the procurement of food. What he's saying actually is that the idea of energy and capital and economy, if not directly derived from the metabolism, they have a very strong related genealogy in what's called in 19th century America economic nutrition, this field of scientific field. And it goes so far actually that this kind of entanglement between the metabolism and capitalism, that there are very important researches in 21st century where synthetic biologists are reshaping the metabolic process itself to create new forms and new sources of energy. And that's the subject of the article written by STS scholar Adrian Mackenzie in the journal Body and Society. It's again a really great article. So thanks, Morita-san. I think I heard first from Morita-san about this article a couple of years ago. So it's really a great article, and it kind of, in my reading at least, it kind of gives a different twist to the story what's written by Kuriyama in early modern Europe and America. So he says, Adrian Mackenzie says that in 21st century synthetic biology, one change in the biological associated with biofuels is the tendency to treat all life as potential fuel producers. Many scientists present microbes such as macroalgae, cyanobacteria, and bacteria as having geophysical scale word-making capacities. He writes about this kind of synthetic biologies as a way to change and reshape the very metabolic processes that were that created capitalism, or that contributed to the idea of capital as we know it today. To work on these kind of metabolic processes to create new sources of fuel in new forms of biofuels. So and there we have the Anthropocene bodies that their energy infrastructures and our human bodies are kind of implicated in each other through the metabolism. This is my final slide before the discussion questions, is that one result of this kind of thinking through the metabolism is that Earth system scientists are now able to write a historical timeline or a planetary timeline through the metabolism. So this is from an article written by Yavinder Mali, an Earth system scientist at Oxford University, who gives us a timeline from hunter-gatherer metabolisms through agricultural metabolism to industrial metabolism, where the impact of humans on the planet is measured in energy, is measured in what he calls the extended metabolism or social metabolism of humans. And as you can see, and the reason I tend to think of this as also as a quasi alternative timeline is that what is very interesting about this timeline is if you look at the numbers, there is actually a much bigger jump and change from hunter-gathering to agriculture metabolism than from agriculture to industrial. So if you think of this timeline, it's not necessarily colonialism that made the biggest change in terms of a human control over the planet, but much more it is the agriculture metabolism. But interestingly, when it's put on a graph, it looks much more like again that the human impact on the globe is not starting rapidly changing from the spread of farming, but much more from industrialization, but not from colonization, at least on this kind of timeline. Now, this is really my last slide. It's just some questions for you. Most of what I was talking about, I think, was somewhere between speculation and some kind of historical account. But maybe it gives you some idea or ammunition to think about what could have been. For example, if a society where aging is not a disease or it's not a chronic condition, can we imagine a society where most people die without being sick? Or because I think our society is a society where we think that the last 30 years of your life or 40 years of your life is a sick state or is in a chronic condition, but at least the last 20. So can we imagine a society where that's not the case? Or can we imagine an economy without the metabolic connection between capital and bodies? Or if I want to go a step further, can we imagine a world without economy itself? Or a world without linear and progressive histories? Can you write one? So when you think about your assignment for this class or for this word making, can you build a word that is not progressing through a linear history? Can it be cyclical histories where, for example, disease or plagues just come and go and populations thrive and then they decline and then they thrive and then they decline? Or can they be overlapping histories where, for example, immune system times and key times, which probably have very different timelines from a colonial timeline, they are composites. They add on to each other, and they are in one. They form one world that diffracts in different ways. Or can it be historical loops where each generation re-embodies the events of their ancestors? Can we imagine this kind of world, or is it something for you, or maybe you can try something else? But I think one thing that I learned from breaking down sugar and its malfunction in the body from diabetes is that most of our times or timelines are anything but linear. It's just that we are not very good at imagining those non-linear timelines. So probably that's one thing that we could do in this project. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gergely. Would you like to take a 5-minute break before moving on to discussion? All right. I will stop recording for 5 minutes and we will meet at 7:10.
Good. So it will.
Sure. So can I?
Please, the first question is for you. Can you read it out loud because it will not be recorded in the video?
Okay. So Liliana's question is that like this. I was curious to hear more about how European colonialism impacted the sugar economy in Asia. Professor Morita mentioned transformations of trade and migration flows, but I was wondering about the production techniques. How was the production of sugar in Asia impacted by the development of slave-based plantation system in the New World? This is a very interesting question. And I think, yeah, I couldn't include stories about technology in my talk, but this is also pretty interesting aspect of the impact of Western colonialism in Asia, because unlike 19th century colonialism, uh, early colonialism in Asia didn't have any much impact in terms of technological development, or in other words, probably it might be more precise, the relationship between Western and Asian or Chinese technology was more, how should I say, more equal or more mutual in that area from 70s to 18th century. So in case of sugar production, Thailand continued producing sugar with Chinese technology up until mid or even slightly late 19th century. And this old technique was totally get rid of, outdated in late 19th century when Dutch built a new sugar refinery plant in Java. So it was late 19th century. So up until then, traditional Chinese, or I'm not sure if traditional is good word for this, but Chinese technology, sugar technology was at least surviving in the international market, sugar market in Asia. And when I was doing fieldwork in Thailand, I could still see some of old Chinese sugarcane rollers, which was the central technology of sugar production, Chinese sugar production technology in some villages. They seemed to use some of these for local production until maybe mid 20th century, and then some of them just kept it for as some kind for exhibition and so on. So right, so in that sense, colonialism's impact, early colonial impact was quite different from the late 19th century colonial impact, when practically everything was replaced by Western technology and organizational forms and so on. And yeah, yes, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, Kine?
Thank you, and sorry, the sound cut out. Thank you. These were really, really interesting talks, both of them, and relates to a bunch of things that I'm thinking about myself at the moment. I have a kind of a follow-up question almost to Liliana's, because I was wondering about the history and both East Asian local colonial history and more broad colonial history related to different kinds of sugar. Because at least in a European context, which is the one that I know the best in case of sugar consumption, there's quite different histories connected to sugar as coming from cane or beets. And it affects different kinds of colonial histories as well. And I know that Japan has also had a movement towards beet sugar, and I think especially in Hokkaido they have like promoted a certain beet sugar identity. So I was wondering both if you know something about that, but also which kind of colonial world-making processes are tied to the different kinds of sugars, and perhaps also including palm sugar and coconut sugars and other things that are more specific to warmer climates in, for instance, Southeast Asia.
Thank you. That is a great question. I think First of all, beets, I think I know very little or practically nothing about beets because beets doesn't show up in historical records as long as I know. So I imagine that beets production in Hokkaido is quite new thing, probably introduced from Europe or somewhere else. And traditional premodernt sugar trade was almost entirely centered on sugar cane. And sugar cane is, and the cultivation technology of sugar cane was one of the key, one of the most famous Chinese technologies. And I guess because sugar cane is originally from India, so sugarcane cultivation was also in Southeast Asia even before Chinese traders came in. But 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 refinery of sugar was more or less totally dependent on Chinese technology up in until 19th century. And that is one thing, but also there's a really interesting difference of colonialism and forms of agriculture around this sort of tradition in East Asian countries. But that kind of form of plantation that have much trade in many Americas plantation, particularly in terms of concentration of land ownership, I think. But in Thailand, such kind of land concentration probably was not really a big issue in now as well as in 20th century. In Thailand, agricultural production is predominantly dominated by smallholders. So it's a typical peasant farming country. So in that sense, Chinese plantation in Thailand seems to be relatively limited and probably isolated from local economy to some extent. I think this was because of low population density in Thailand until late 19th century. So it seems, and coastal areas where Chinese traders constructed plantations was some sort of frontier areas where Thai farmers didn't settle much in 18 and until probably 19th century. So it seems that the Chinese traders occupied more or less vacant land on the coastal areas and produced sugarcane, maybe with relatively limited relationship with local Thai farmers. Farmers. So yeah, and also there's also interesting story about sugar technology. On one hand, in China and Philippines, the technology transfer from China to these areas as well areas was mostly carried out by setting up of plantations by Chinese traders. But on the other hand, in Japan, because of this, the policy that prohibited foreigners to enter the country, technology transfer mostly happened on written document base. So it was something. So basically, Japanese scholars sort of read Chinese document explaining about sugar production and tried to reconstruct sugar mills, Chinese sugar mills in southern part of Japan, like Amami Oshima, probably Amami Oshima and some part of Kyushu, I think. So it took a lot of time, maybe very yeah, a lot of time, and so Japanese scholars had to basically almost reconstruct the whole technology from scratch without any tangible models. That is also very interesting story. Yeah, thank you.
It is quite an interesting story.
Just a short comment on that. It's really just short and probably not too informative, but to Lina's question is that as far as I don't know, but I'm almost certain that beet production in Hokkaido was brought by American investors. Maybe Emil has some, I don't know, maybe, but I'm almost sure that not Europeans. And the other thing that I was going to just comment on is that I read an article long ago on how Meiji industrialists tried to establish plantation system of sugarcane in Okinawa, and they couldn't for all kinds of reasons, maybe for resistance or something, but that just didn't happen, and sugarcane remained mostly a peasant kind of production form, small farms, at least until the beginning of 20th century. I'm not sure about mid 20th century, but I remember reading this article on kind of it as a failure. Or they tried to establish plantations in Okinawa, and there was obviously sugarcane production before that time, but they couldn't do it for some reasons.
Right, and still in Southeast Asia, most of large part of sugarcane is cultivated by small holders. So yeah, there's practically no plantation in Thailand, I think.
Interesting. Can I ask something in addition to all of this? You said that the Chinese in the plantations that they basically used vacant lands and they did not interact much with Thai farmers. Is there sort of like is there not a sort of lasting influence or like a sort of lasting effect from the presence of Chinese sugar plantations, apart from the left behind technologies or the sort of like the influence of this sort of trade routes that made Thailand a sort of important place in the system? What was it called? The
tributary system.
So like was there, what I'm trying to ask basically is, was there a cultural like influence left after this whole thing happening?
Yeah, in terms of cultural influence, of course there are a lot. So a lot of Chinese people migrated to Thailand and Southeast Asian countries. So they lived there, and they large percentage of urban population is basically Chinese descent. So that kind of heritage is quite obvious, but this is also different from legacy of plantation economy in Latin America. So that is one thing, and also it was yeah. I don't think my research was I did so as I looked into every corner of these cities, but it was quite difficult to find any historical trace of Chinese sugar production in Thailand, aside from old technology, old Chinese machines, and that was probably probably that was due to, the fact that they shifted from sugar to rice in the late 19th century. So when sugar economy collapsed due to Dutch innovation, Chinese investment and Thai nobles investment shifted to rice production. So they also opened up huge rice fields in central Thailand, where population density was still low in late 19th century, and created and constructed canal networks and huge paddy fields, and invited Thai and Chinese farmers to cultivate land. So I think in a sense, this plantation economy morphed into different kind of economy, which is rice economy.
Thank you. Very interesting. So maybe we should move on to other questions if we have. By the way, in the meantime, there were some comments about beet production in Hokkaido.
Yeah, we created a Hokkaido lab in the chat.
So Emil says that it's adopted from North America, but he's not sure. Definitely post 19th century. Gage says beet production history may have some similar and different motives to salmon cultivation in Hokkaido. Then Lin says it makes sense that sugar beet cultivation in Hokkaido would be connected to that history. Because this will not be in the video, so I wanted to read. Yes, comments, questions, please.
Can I also say something about this historical legacy of plantation? Yeah, so I think this is very interesting that, as a social institution and economic impact, it is difficult to see the legacy of Chinese plantations in Thailand. But I think one possible, yeah. But at the same time, you can see ecological impact of plantation indirectly, or you can speculate that from current landscape. So, for example, deforestation, some historical documents, based on historical studies, it seems clear that a massive shipbuilding by Chinese traders ended up in deforestation of coastal area of the Gulf of Thailand, and you can and this deforested landscape is still there and visible. There's very little large trees are left. So and also landscapes have been totally transformed in central Thailand. Successive land development after sugarcane, particularly rice paddy development. So although you cannot see much of plantation legacy there, landscape certainly has been transformed through the historical process.
That is a very important point to think of the transformation of the landscape as a sort of effect of this whole process of sugar trade and deforestation. By the way, we have a question. This can be for either of you. Shall I read it? It's from Emil, and Emil says that Chakrabarty argues that capitalism was a global process rather than a planetary one. He argues that the planetary environmental limitations and changes to planetary processes were revealed only in the previous century through the global process of colonialism and capitalism. There are obviously many definitions of the Anthropocene and where planetary change began. But how does treating the history of sugar as a planetary process change the way we think of history and metabolism? It can be for either of you. Please take it.
Yeah, thank you. This is super interesting question. And right, I think so. I think one of interesting thing to think about sugar as sugar as an indicator of planetary environmental change is that it it allows us to see the invisible it allows us to see that how pre-colonial landscapes and cultures of Asia was deeply entangled with colonialism, and I think this is this has to do with the difference between the planetary history and global history, probably. So on the one hand, the notion of the global denotes human activities and trade and economy. So it presupposes distinction, separation between nature and culture, and mostly focuses on culture or social aspect. But from that viewpoint, it is not. But from that viewpoint, the colonialism's impact on 17th century Asia is I'm not saying it is this global viewpoint makes colonial entanglement invisible, but I think it allows in that viewpoint entanglement becomes less visible. Whereas if you take this planetary viewpoint, including non-humans and so on, such entanglement would become more visible. That is my question, my answer. But I'm not sure this is a good answer to your question. So I'd like to think a bit more about this and pass it to Gergely.
I think it's a wonderful question, and I think we could spend a whole class with trying to figure it out together. But basically, what I think I have to go back and maybe to Kuriyama's and Mackenzie's work, because I think that's kind of an answer to Emil's question here, namely that because the very reason that we have an idea or an object of energy that played a super important role in global capitalism, as Dominic talked about it 2 weeks ago, I think, or 3. The very idea of that it goes back to the discovery by early modern medical science, the discovery of the metabolism. And that was a discovery that food, when we eat it, it doesn't just go out on the other side, but actually it's turned into energy. That's a certain kind of discovery in medical science. And that was picked up by economists, and it was picked up by the science of economic nutrition, according to Kuriyama, saying that it's a chance then. If you have, if sugar is, and the metabolism in the human body, of course, it's a big part of it is breaking down sugar and carbohydrates to glucose. So sugar can be turned into energy, and then it can be turned into work. It means that there is a chance to turn it into capital, according to this early economist. So if there is a chance there to do this on a global scale, then obviously there is a link where this discovery or this idea that that food is not just food, but it can be turned into energy, is something that you can turn into money and make it into money. Now, I understand that Emil's problem with this, or at least looking at his question, is that it's a global process, but where does it turn into a planetary issue or a planetary scale? I think the answer to that, or at least let's say a partial answer to that, probably it started earlier than that, but what Mackenzie says with his idea of the Anthropocene body is that that synthetic biology actually acts upon that very metabolism. So it's not anymore only an extension of energy in fossil fuel, in oil or coal, outside of the human body or outside of the biological body, but it's inside the body, inside not human, but at this point at least other biological entities' body itself becomes the target of synthetic biology, and the metabolic process becomes all kind of metabolic process. Life itself becomes a potential fuel. So life on the planet, not on different nodes, global nodes where you have fossil fuel, but life in general in the whole planet, life becomes an energy source, and life becomes a fuel for synthetic biology, and that's what Mackenzie calls the Anthropocene body. Now, I'm not saying that because it's a 21st century development, so I'm not saying that this is where the global turns into planetary, but I think that's also a very important turning point. But maybe there are different turning points. I don't know. Obviously, it's not a full answer, but just my speculation.
Thank you. In the meantime, Eduardo wrote a comment. Something key to many of the points raised here is the notion of retroactive causation. It's arguably only retroactively in looking back that anthropogenic destruction appears to have always been there from the start. Similarly, traditions emerge as altered past possibilities, as new propositions about the past. Henry Bergson explored in some depth this idea. Thank you, Eduardo. I would say yes. I suppose it can only be clear in retroactive causation, because I suppose when it was happening, there was no global, no planetary. It was basically the unknown, and that sort of lure of the unknown, that what they can get from the unknown, I suppose. Unknown being the territories that lay beyond what they know. Thank you. So, any other questions?
Can I have a brief comment on this?
Yes.
Because I think there are two different ways that this is retroactive or not. For example, I think the very famous, and I don't have to repeat here, theory that or conceptualization of all this that Morita-san started his talk with, namely Sidney Mint's idea of how sugar and capitalism are related, is obviously a retrospective unfolding of, I mean, describing this history retrospectively, yes. But when you're talking about nutrition scientists or synthetic biologists who are actually act upon certain concepts and certain biological processes to change history, to turn history into something else, then I wouldn't call that retrospective. I would call that actually an acting upon history through, for example, biological processes, and that's very real time, or let's say future building kind of actions, not at all retrospective or retroactive. But maybe I I'm off the book. I don't know. It's up to Eduardo to.
This is basically the Eduardo says thank you. This is basically what the whole issue is, not issue, but like the sort of what we are dealing with in terms of the Anthropocene, right? We are both retrospectively discovering what has like this, that what we have, not we have, like what has been suspected for at least a century, but has been going on for more than like 500 years. But also we have to act on it at this moment, do something so that we can, like, this is what how dealing with the climate change, how we're dealing with the Anthropocene is all about. To operate with different sort of flows of time so that we can both see it in its terrible glory, that is like, you know, how anthropogenic causes have been destroying the earth for a long time, but also to do something we have to, like, we cannot be as slow, we have to be on top of it. I don't know, please take it away from my hands. I usually trail off when I start talking.
Yeah, I think this retroactive point is great, and it is really important to issue when we think about the Anthropocene. And I think Emil also, I think this also relates to Emil's point about the planetary and global. I think, yeah. I think Chakrabarti's point is also similar to what Atsuro said. So he said his point is that this revelation of the planetary process by Earth system science changes the way we see the planet and its history, and therefore it retrospectively rewrite history, the global history by adding new elements such as environment, plants, and so on and so forth. So, so in that sense, in that sense, Anthropocene is always retroactive, but one thing, but at the same time, I think it is also about, but also sugar can also be seen as a, I'm sorry, I I can't really yeah.
This is for future discussions, I suppose.
All right.
Do we have any other questions? It's already close to 2 hours, so like, and everyone looks quite tired. So if we don't,
Eduardo is writing one, I guess.
Eduardo was writing and then he sent something, and I don't know if he's still writing.
Yeah, sorry. It's difficult to write on this Zoom. I don't know why. I guess it's easier to talk.
We can't hear you. Like, we can hear you, but you're too, like, your noise, there's a lot of noise. Can you try again?
Yeah.
Is it only me?
Hear me better now?
Yes, it is better now.
Okay.
Night and day.
No, yeah, I sent that by mistake, but really what I wanted to emphasize is that retractive determination is always a politically salient process or act. I was thinking in hearing Atsuro talk back on Ernest Geller's, conjunction of politics with tradition. In the especially in the Pacific. So how the idea of custom and traditions came to emerge and were deployed always in a political context. So the sacralization of the past is obviously never neutral, and neither is this kind of retractive causation. But one could argue that once we inhabit a certain, once we adopt certain ontological premises for what exists, like the Anthropocene, then its existence starts to seem so universal that we can retrace it all the way back to the Big Bang. I mean, it's always been with us. And so obviously one has to be careful about this, about what assumptions underlie this, you know, the historical facts or the events that we are dealing with. So sorry, it's just a general comment really, but obviously we could discuss this for much longer.
Yeah, I think you know, this retroactive explanation depends on you know, the value or problem of retroactive explanation depends on what you want to achieve with that. And my talk was basically stimulated by this fixed assumption that about what if Western colonialism never happened. And I think in this case, the fixed provocation triggered my my kind of retroactive exploration, and that is, in my view, that is productive for the fixed purposes. Because on one hand, you know, if you just take non-colonial world or decolonial world, particularly if you ask this question in the context of Asia, people tend to think, you know, going back to, for example, 18th century. And for example, Europe without industrial revolution. Therefore, Asia and Europeans' power balance was more or less equal. And no formal colonization in Asia happened. And that is kind of our standard imagination, I think, particularly in Japan. But this all totally eclipses the fact that, you know, colonization of the Americas started much earlier, and its impact transformed economy and everyday life in Asia too. So in that sense, my retrospective experiment was sort of digging up deeper colonial entanglement, even where people tend to see, you know, non-colonial art in Asia. And that is, for me, that was very interesting sort of experiment. So, and also this helps me to think of non-colonial world as totally alien to, you know, totally unfamiliar to most, you know, decolonial imagination. Or, here I observe. So I think yeah, retroactive. Yeah. Yes, I will stop here. Just stop here.
Thank you. I agree with you. I would say that saying like Anthropocene started with the Big Bang is a bit of a stretch, especially considering like what Anthropocene is, you know, how they started measuring it with, you know, the Earth system scientists and everything. But then yes, one might have to be careful about, like, you know, I suppose talking about these concepts. Is there any other question? Or
I guess I wanted to point to the concept of colonialism and how are we using it here, and because I think it impacts on what the decolonial imagination means in Asia, as Morita Sensei mentioned. Like in Japan, at least, it points to Europeans coming in the 19th century, and it made me wonder if you were thinking of this Chinese involvement in Thailand and Southeast Asia as colonial itself, and if so, what exactly is colonial? I understand that colonialism and imperialism go hand in hand, but I believe there is something very different to what Europeans did in the world, and it comes with an encounter with in the New World in America, right? So I don't know. I guess I was worried of kind of like decolonizing colonialism, like everybody can do colonialism now, and I don't know if that is something interesting to explore because it makes colonialism very imprecise and
right. Yeah, that is very good question, and I'm not. Yeah, it may not be very clear, but I was not using the word colonialism to these Chinese endeavors, and I want to reserve the word colonialism to only Western endeavors, and that is one. And there seems to be a big difference between Chinese plantations in Southeast Asia and Western colonialism in terms of connection between trading and politics. So, in case of Chinese operation in Chinese plantations and other commercial operation in Southeast Asia, the Chinese empire Chinese dynasties have almost never supported or formally involved in these trade commercial activities. So in that sense, emperors and their government are more or less totally indifferent to these commercial activities. And this is sharply different from Western endeavors, where government, science, commercial activities, military operation, and everything is tightly connected. And I think this closely aligned this close linkage among different sorts of activity is particularly characteristic to Western colonialism, and it might be the seed of capitalism. But in this tributary system in Asia, Chinese emperor was nominal center of this trading system, but he was mostly concerned about his, quasi-mystical or cosmological sovereignty. So Chinese emperor is, nominally the ruler of the universe. I mean, so he claims his sovereignty, reaches all over the world, so that less civilized people like Japanese and Thais should become tributaries to him, so that he, these less civilized people could benefit from the sovereign power of the emperor. That kind of cosmological interest was more important for the Chinese dynasties than commercial profit. So in that, and in this system, large part of trading was done as illegal from Chinese government's viewpoint. So in that sense, there's a almost total disconnection between political projects and commercial and industrial projects.
Thank you. We are at 2 hours. So I suppose we should, like, say goodbye for today. We learned a lot. I learned a lot. So that's like, we can use this to further our discussion. Thank you, Gergely. Thank you, Atsuro. Thank you for
Thank you.
amazing talk. And I will upload this. Are you okay with me uploading it publicly?
Well, I think it would be better to upload on the Discord server.
Okay, I will upload it unlisted and then post the link on the Discord server, and I will not promote it on the website, on the Twitter. So thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good
Have a
evening.
nice day, night, everything.